The janitor supervisor rolls his eyes and speaks loudly enough for everyone to hear. Look, old-timer, if you can't keep up with the cleaning schedule, maybe it's time to find a new job. 84-year-old Captain Robert Hayes continues mopping the ship's deck in silence, his bent frame moving slowly as crew members walk past. None of them realize that the small bronze star barely visible on his worn work shirt represents the day he saved an entire battalion in Vietnam. What happens next will leave you speechless. If stories like this move you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments about a veteran hero you know. Their stories deserve to be heard. Robert had been working as a janitor on the cargo ship for 3 years now. His social security barely covered his rent, and this job helped him buy groceries and medicine. The work was hard for someone his age, but he never complained. The supervisor, Mike Collins, was only 32 and treated Robert like he was invisible most days. Today was different. Today Mike was angry about something, and Robert was an easy target. You missed 3 spots yesterday, Mike shouted across the deck. The other workers stopped what they were doing. Some pulled out their phones. And this morning you were 20 minutes late again. Robert kept his head down, wringing out his MOP. I'm sorry, sir. I had a doctor's appointment. I told you yesterday. Mike stepped closer, his voice getting louder. I don't care about your appointments, old man. You think because you're ancient I should give you special treatment. This isn't a nursing home. A small crowd had formed now. Dock workers, ship crew members, even some passengers waiting to board were watching. Someone was definitely recording on their phone. Look at him, Mike continued, pointing at Robert. Can barely hold the mop steady. Probably can't even remember what he did 5 minutes ago. A few people in the crowd laughed. Robert's hands shook slightly, but not from age. From anger he was trying to control. Maybe it's time for you to retire, Grandpa, Mike said with a smirk. Find a nice rocking chair somewhere and leave the real work to real men. That's enough, Robert said quietly, still not looking up. What did you say? Mike demanded, getting right in Robert's face. I said that's enough, Robert repeated, this time looking directly at Mike. His voice was calm but firm. Mike laughed and turned to the crowd. Did you all hear that? The old janitor is giving me orders now. A woman in the crowd stepped forward. She had been watching the whole thing with growing disgust. Leave him alone, she said. He's just trying to do his job. Mike spun around. Mind your own business, lady. This is between me and the old man. But more people were starting to speak up. A dock worker called out, Hey man, that's not cool. Another voice said, Pick on someone your own size. Mike was getting more agitated. His face was red now. Oh great, now I have a whole crowd of do-gooders telling me how to run my crew. You know what? He turned back to Robert. You're fired, old man. Pack up your stuff and get out. The crowd went silent. Robert stood there holding his mop, looking at this young man who had just taken away his only source of income. The bronze star on his shirt caught a ray of sunlight. That's when the woman who had spoken up earlier noticed something. She took a step closer and squinted at Robert's chest. Wait a minute, she said. Is that what I think it is? Robert looked down at his shirt. The small bronze star medal was pinned near his pocket. He had forgotten he was wearing it. His grandson had given it back to him last week after finding it in his grandfather's old military trunk. Oh my God, the woman said louder. That's a bronze star. This man is a war veteran. The crowd pressed closer to see. More phones came out, but now they were pointed at Robert with respect instead of mockery. Mike rolled his eyes. So what? Lots of old guys claim they were in the war. Doesn't mean he can't do his job. But Robert was already reaching into his back pocket. He pulled out his old leather wallet and carefully removed a faded photograph. It showed a much younger Robert in military uniform standing with his unit in what looked like a jungle setting. Vietnam, 1968, Robert said quietly. 173rd Airborne Brigade, Charlie Company. A man in the crowd who looked to be in his 50s pushed forward. My dad served with the 173rd, he said with amazement. Where did you serve, sir? Hill, 875, Robert answered. Battle of Dak 2. The crowd went completely silent. Even Mike stopped smirking. Some people had heard of that battle. It was one of the bloodiest of the Vietnam War. Robert continued speaking, his voice getting stronger. November 19, 1967. We were pinned down on that hill for 4 days. Lost a lot of good men. I was a lieutenant then, leading the 2nd platoon. The woman who first noticed his medal had tears in her eyes. "What happened up there, sir?" Robert looked at the faces around him. Young faces, old faces, all listening now with complete attention. For 40 years he had never talked about this. Not to his wife before she passed. Not to his children. Not to anyone. "We had been fighting for 3 days straight," he began, "running low on ammunition, water, medical supplies. The North Vietnamese had us surrounded. On the 4th morning, they launched a massive attack. We were about to be overrun." Paused, the memories flooding back. "My radio operator was hit. Medic was treating wounded behind some rocks. I could see enemy soldiers advancing up the slope, maybe 50 yards away. The crowd was hanging on every word. Even Mike was listening now, his anger replaced by curiosity. That's when I heard it," Robert continued. "Helicopter rotors, but they couldn't land because of all the enemy fire. The pilot was trying to drop supplies, but they kept missing our position and landing in enemy hands." "What did you do?" someone asked. Robert looked at the bronze star on his shirt. "I grabbed a flare gun and ran out into the open. Katuma, exact position so the chopper could find us. But that meant exposing myself to enemy fire from 3 directions. The silence was so complete you could hear the water lapping against the ship's hull. I fired that flare and dove behind a fallen tree. Bullets were hitting all around me. But the pilot saw the flare and dropped the supplies right on target. Ammunition, medical supplies, water. It saved my whole platoon. And that's why you got the bronze star," the woman asked. Robert nodded. "But that's not the end of the story. The supply drop gave us enough ammunition to hold out until reinforcements arrived the next morning. 34 men in my platoon made it off that hill alive. Without those supplies, we all would have died. That day. A young man in the crowd stepped forward. His voice was shaky. "Sir, my grandfather was a Daktu. He never talked about it much, but he always said some lieutenant saved his life by marking their position for a supply drop. His name was Robert Hayes." Robert stared at the young man. "Your grandfather's name?" "Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez," the young man replied. Robert's eyes filled with tears. "Tommy Rodriguez, 3rd Squad, kid from Texas who always talked about his ranch back home." "That's him," the young man whispered. "He passed away 2 years ago, but he never forgot you, sir. He named my father after you." Robert Rodriguez. By now, half the crowd was crying. Mike stood frozen, his face pale, realizing what he had done. Robert looked around at all these faces. For 50 years he had carried the weight of that day in silence. He never thought of himself as a hero. He just did what needed to be done to save his men. The woman who first noticed his medal spoke up again, her voice strong and clear. "This man is not just a janitor. He's a war hero who saved dozens of lives. And you just fired him for being old." The crowd turned to look at Mike. Someone had been recording the whole thing. The video was probably already online. Mike's hands were shaking now. "Sir, I didn't know. I'm sorry. Please, your job is safe. You can work here as long as you want." But Robert was already unbuttoning his work shirt. He folded it neatly and handed it to Mike, along with his mop and bucket. "Son," he said calmly, "I've been cleaning up messes my whole life. In the war, I cleaned up the mess that would have killed my men. After the war, I came home and cleaned up the mess that trauma had made of my life. For 3 years, I've been cleaning up the messes on this ship, but I can't clean up the mess you made today with your words." He turned to address the crowd. "I didn't serve my country and risk my life so that 50 years later, some young man could treat me like garbage just because I'm old. I served so that people could live in a country where everyone deserves respect, regardless of their age." Robert straightened his shoulders. Despite being 84, he suddenly looked strong and proud. The crowd watched as this old man transformed before their eyes from a broken janitor into the war hero he had always been. "Thank you all for listening to my story," he said, "but I won't be working here anymore. A man who doesn't respect his elders doesn't deserve their service." As Robert walked away, the crowd began to follow him. The woman who first noticed his medal called out, "Sir, wait. Where will you go?" Robert turned back with a small smile. "I'll figure something out. I always do. I survived Hill 875. I think I can handle whatever comes next." The video of the confrontation went viral within hours. By the next morning, Robert had received dozens of job offers from companies who wanted to hire a real American hero. But more importantly, he had finally told his story. After 50 years of silence, the weight was finally lifted from his shoulders. Sometimes the most important battles we fight are not with weapons, but with words. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating an enemy, but from standing up for what's right, even when you're standing alone.